In the shadow of Vesuvius, the bustling city of Pompeii slumbers on its last night. The streets are alive with the sounds of life, unaware that by morning they will be entombed in ash and stone. This is that story. The scent of roasting garum wafted through the warm air, mingling with the faint aroma of incense from a nearby temple. In the bustling marketplace, vendors called out offers, their voices echoing off the stone pavements. A woman in a flowing stola navigated the crowd, her sandals clicking softly on the ground. Nearby, children played at the edge of a fountain, splashing water that sparkled like tiny diamonds under the moonlight. In the dim glow of an oil lamp, a young woman prepared her nightly ablutions. The water in the basin shimmered with the faint reflection of flickering flames, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. She dipped her fingers into the cool liquid, the sensation both soothing and invigorating. Nearby, a pile of clean linen waited, its crisp edges untouched by the chaos that would soon come. Outside, the night was silent, unaware of the impending disaster. The night air was thick with the scent of jasmine, mingling with the distant aroma of roasting meats from open kitchens. A man strolled through the cobblestone streets, his sandals whispering against the stones. Lanterns flickered in windows, casting pools of light on the ground. In a courtyard, laughter echoed as friends gathered around a table laden with food and wine, unaware of the rumbling mountain above them. The clatter of pottery echoed through the narrow alleyways, where a young boy carried jars from one shop to another. The stones beneath his feet were warm from the day's sun, and the walls of the houses seemed to breathe in the fading light. Inside a small tavern, patrons laughed over dice games, their voices mixing with the clink of cups. Above them, on a balcony, a woman combed her hair by candlelight, unaware that the mountain shadow had just darkened the sky. The rhythmic thud of a loom filled the small workshop, where a woman weaved by candlelight. Her fingers moved with practiced ease, the wool fibers sliding through her grasp like whispers. The walls were lined with spools and rolls of fabric in muted tones, their textures soft against her skin. Outside, the night was calm, the air thick with the scent of jasmine. She did not hear the first distant rumble that would soon shake the earth. A torchbearer flicked his wrist, sending sparks into the night as he guided guests through winding streets towards an evening of revelry. The rhythmic clink of wine cups and laughter filled the air, carried on a warm breeze that whispered through open windows. Alongside the road, shadows lengthened under flickering lanterns, while behind closed doors, conversations hushed to a murmur of secrets. No one noticed the first tremors beneath their feet, or the faint glow creeping up the distant mountain. The scent of roasting chestnuts wafted from a street vendor's cart, mingling with the cool night air. A young girl huddled close to her mother as they shopped for evening necessities, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of lanterns hanging from eaves. Inside a modest home, a family reclined on cushions around an oil lamp, sharing stories and laughter. Unbeknownst to them, the first wisps of ash began to drift down from the darkening sky, unnoticed amidst the familiar nightfall. The night air carried the distant murmur of water as it trickled through the city's aqueducts. In a small bathhouse, steam rose from marble basins, mingling with the scent of herbs and oils. Naked figures moved gracefully through the fog, their skin glistening under flickering oil lamps. A woman soaked her hair by a pool, unaware that the mountain had begun to tremble, sending ripples across the water's surface. The night enveloped Pompeii like a whisper, with flickering lanterns casting long shadows across cobblestones. In the heart of the forum, voices drifted from open doors, the sound of lyres mingling with laughter. Above, stars twinkled in a darkening sky, unnoticed as the first ash began to fall gently onto rooftops and streets. Inside homes, families slept peacefully, unaware that their city's final night had begun. The rhythmic splash of water against marble echoed in the bathhouse. A young man, his skin slick with sweat, reached for a towel hanging beside him. The oil lamps flickered weakly, casting shadows that danced across the walls. He paused to listen, but heard only the usual sounds of the night's soft murmurs and distant laughter. Above, unseen, Vesuvius rumbled softly, its first protest against the calm. The flickering glow of an oil lamp cast long shadows across the room, illuminating a family gathered around a low table. Their conversation was punctuated by soft laughter and clinking cups, as they shared their evening meal. Outside, the night air was warm and still, carrying the distant sounds of music from nearby festivities. Unbeknownst to them, the first tendrils of ash began to flutter gently through the open window, mingling with the familiar sense of home. A gentle breeze carried the scent of wood smoke and roasting meat through narrow streets as families gathered around hearths inside their homes. The air was warm, filled with the distant hum of voices and music from open windows. Above, Vesuvius loomed silently, its first ash clouds barely visible against the darkening sky. Inside a small tavern, patrons laughed and clinked cups, unaware that their city's final night had begun. In the quiet of a small alley, the sound of footsteps echoed off stone walls. A cat darted across the cobblestones, tail flicking in the dim light of an oil lamp hanging from a low beam. Inside a modest home, a woman sat at her loom, weaving under the soft glow of candlelight. The rhythmic clack of wooden shuttles filled the room, interrupted only by the distant rumble of Vesuvius, a sound she mistook for passing thunder. Outside, the first ash settled silently on the ground. The rhythmic scrape of a knife against wood filled the quiet courtyard. A man carved symbols into an olive branch, the scent of crushed leaves mingling with the warm night air. Around him, stone walls glowed faintly under the soft light of oil lamps. Inside the house, voices murmured softly over dice and wine, unaware that Vesuvius rumbled in the distance, its first ash swirling silently through the courtyard. Inside a small shop, the scent of spices filled the air as an old man sifted through sacks of cumin and coriander by candlelight. Outside, the street buzzed with late-night activity laughter from a nearby tavern, the clink of metal on stone as workers put away tools for the night. Above, Vesuvius rumbled faintly. The night air was thick with the scent of roasting bread as a baker worked late in his small, stone-walled bakery. Flames danced within the oven, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Outside, Vesuvius rumbled softly, but the baker paid it no mind, lost in the rhythm of kneading dough and tending to the fire. The clatter of tools and the heat from the oven filled his world, a comforting routine he had known for decades. In the bathhouse, steam rose in thick curls, mingling with the scent of damp stone and incense. A woman wrapped herself in a linen towel, her bare feet cool against the wet tiles. The distant rumble of Vesuvius seemed like the muffled heartbeat of the earth itself. Torchlight flickered over carved marble columns, casting shifting shadows on the walls. Men conversed softly, unaware that their world was about to be swallowed by ash. The sound of flutes and lyres drifted through the open windows, mingling with the soft murmur of conversation in the courtyard. A young couple strolled hand in hand beneath the flickering torches, their laughter light against the growing rumble of Vesuvius. Inside a nearby room, a woman sewed by candlelight, a needle moving deftly through fabric as she listened to the distant music and the soft rustle of leaves in the courtyard. Unaware, they moved through the night, the first whispers of ash settling silently around them. The cobbler's shop was a quiet refuge, the air thick with the scent of leather and polish. Tools lay scattered across the workbench, each one familiar from years of use. Outside, Vesuvius rumbled like distant thunder, but inside, the only sound was the scrape of the knife against rawhide as he cut another sole. The flicker of candlelight danced on his bent back, the shadows mimicking the growing unease that lay just beyond this small, warm world. The courtyard was a quiet sanctuary under the moonlight, where the rustling of fig leaves and chirping crickets filled the air. A young girl sat on a stone bench, her eyes fixed on the distant glow of Vesuvius. Her mother called softly from inside, urging her to come in, but she lingered, lost in the serene night. The faint tremor of the earth beneath her feet went unnoticed as she clutched a small wooden doll tightly, unaware that by morning all would be changed. The flicker of a single oil lamp cast long shadows across the room, where a woman sat by an open window. Outside, Vesuvius rumbled softly like distant thunder, but inside, all was quiet except for the rustle of fabric as she sewed. Her needle moved steadily through the cloth, each stitch precise and practiced over years. The scent of smoke began to mingle with the night air, a subtle whisper of change that went unnoticed. The lamp's flame danced against the growing darkness. The soft creak of wooden shutters against stone echoed through the narrow alley. A woman wrapped in a heavy shawl emerged from her home, glancing up at Vesuvius's ominous glow. Her breath misted in the cool air as she made her way to the street vendor still selling bread and olives late into the night. The vendor's voice was calm, though his eyes darted nervously towards the mountain. The scent of freshly baked bread mingled with the growing acridness of smoke. The air was thick with the scent of smoke as a young boy tossed and turned in his sleep, unaware of the rumbling mountain. His mother's voice called softly from the next room, where she tended to the fire, adding dry wood to keep it warm through the night. Outside, Vesuvius growled like an angry beast, but inside, the only sound was the crackle of flames and the soft sighs of slumbering bodies. The flicker of the fire cast long shadows across the room, dancing on the walls like fleeting spirits. The rhythmic sound of water dripping from a stone fountain filled the small garden. A man sat on a bench, his hand resting on the cool marble, eyes fixed on Vesuvius's smouldering silhouette. The air was heavy with smoke and ash. He coughed lightly, but continued to watch. Beside him, a bronze jug and basin lay untouched, ready for morning ablutions. Inside the house, voices murmured softly over dinner, unaware of the mountain's impending wrath. The night air carried the faint, acrid scent of ash as a young woman tended to her baby in the dim light of an oil lamp. Her fingers gently stroked the child's cheek, soothing a restless cry. Outside, Vesuvius rumbled ominously, but inside, the only sounds were soft coos and the crackle of flames. The flickering light cast dancing shadows across the room, mingling with the growing darkness. She hummed a lullaby, unaware that by morning her world would be buried beneath volcanic fury. The sound of a lyre filled the room, soft and melancholic. A man played by candlelight, his fingers moving deftly over the strings. Outside, Vesuvius's glow painted the sky in ominous hues. Inside, the only worry was the next note. The air grew heavy with ash, but here it was just another night of music and quiet routine. Shadows danced on the walls as if performing an ancient dance to the tune of impending doom. The rhythmic thud of a mallet echoed through the blacksmith's shop as sparks flew from hot metal. Flames flickered in the forge, casting an orange glow on the smith's weathered face. Vesuvius loomed beyond the open door, a dark silhouette against the smoky sky. Outside, ash drifted lazily to the ground, but inside, the only concern was shaping iron into tools and weapons that would soon be useless under the mountain's wrath. The flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows on the walls of a small tavern. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and the murmur of conversation. A group of men sat around a wooden table, their faces half hidden by the dim light. Their laughter echoed off the stone walls, oblivious to the rumble of Vesuvius beyond. Outside, ash settled softly on the ground, a silent harbinger of doom. The night was thick with the smell of smoke and dust as a woman knelt by her hearth, stoking embers to life. Her hands moved deftly over the dying fire, coaxing it into a flickering glow that cast eerie shadows across the room. Outside, Vesuvius loomed silent but menacing, its summit hidden in ash-laden clouds. Inside, the only sound was the crackling of wood and her soft breathing, unaware that by morning this hearth would be cold forever. The scent of fresh bread filled the air as a baker mixed dough by lantern light. Vesuvius's distant rumble was drowned out by the rhythmic slap of hands kneading flour and water into life. Shadows danced on the walls, cast by flickering flames that crackled merrily in the hearth. Outside, ash began to settle like ghostly snowflakes, but inside, the baker's world was a warm cocoon of routine and comfort. Unaware of the impending disaster, he continued his work, shaping loaves that would soon be entombed beneath volcanic fury. The air was thick with the scent of olive oil and spices as a woman prepared dinner in her small kitchen. Oil lamps cast flickering shadows on the stone walls, where pots and tools hung in neat rows. Vesuvius's glow painted the sky in ominous hues, but inside, the only concern was tonight's meal. The rhythmic chopping of vegetables filled the room, a comforting sound amid the growing unease outside. Unaware of the impending disaster, she continued her task, lost in the familiar routine. The night was cool and heavy with the scent of wet earth, a stark contrast to the warm oil lamps that flickered in the small apothecary shop. Shadows danced across shelves lined with jars of herbs and poultices. Inside, An old man carefully ground dried leaves into powder, his hands moving with practiced precision. Outside, Vesuvius rumbled like distant thunder, but here time seemed to stand still as he mixed remedies that would soon be lost under the mountain's wrath. The rhythmic dripping of water echoed through the stillness as a young girl washed clothes by the stream. Her hands, rough from daily labor, moved methodically under the faint glow of a half-moon obscured by ash clouds. Vesuvius groaned in the distance, but her world was small and familiar: wet fabric, cold stone, the soft murmur of the water's flow. Unaware of the impending catastrophe, she continued her task, each wash a silent ritual against the encroaching night. The night air was heavy with the scent of charred wood as a man tended to his forge, the flames casting an orange glow on his weathered face. Sparks flew up into the ash-filled sky, mingling with falling cinders. Vesuvius rumbled ominously in the distance, but inside the workshop, the only sound was the rhythmic hammering of metal against metal. The man's hands moved with practiced ease, unaware that by morning this forge would be entombed beneath layers of volcanic ash. The soft glow of a lantern illuminated the small chamber where a woman sat weaving. Her hands moved deftly, each thread interlacing with practiced ease. Outside, the sky glowed an eerie red from Vesuvius's fury, but inside, the only light came from the flickering flame, casting long shadows across the room. The rhythmic clacking of the loom filled the air, a soothing sound that masked the growing chaos beyond. Unaware of the impending disaster, she continued her work, each stroke of the shuttle weaving a familiar pattern against the encroaching darkness. The faint glow of a single oil lamp illuminated the narrow corridor where a young boy read by his bed. The pages of his papyrus scroll cast long shadows, dancing with the flicker of the flame. Outside, the ground trembled slightly, but inside, he was lost in tales of distant lands and heroes. Vesuvius rumbled like an old man's cough, yet here, time slowed to the turn of each page and the soft rustle of parchment. Unaware of the impending doom, his world remained a quiet sanctuary of stories. The sound of water trickled through the bathhouse, mingling with distant rumblings from Vesuvius. Steam curled around marble columns and draped over stone benches where a few bathers lay in whispered conversation, oblivious to the chaos brewing beyond the walls. An old man dipped his feet into the tepid pool, his eyes closed, lost in the warmth. The flicker of oil lamps cast an amber glow, highlighting the intricate patterns etched into the wet stone. The scent of fresh bread wafted through the narrow streets as a baker mixed dough under the faint glow of an oil lamp. His hands moved with practiced ease, kneading the sticky mass into shape. Outside, Vesuvius rumbled like distant thunder, but inside, the only sound was the rhythmic slap of dough against wood. The flickering light cast long shadows across his weathered face and onto the rough stone floor. Unaware of the impending disaster, he continued his work, each motion a silent dance against the encroaching night. The clatter of pottery filled the workshop as a potter spun his wheel, his hands shaping clay into form. Outside, Vesuvius groaned like an old beast waking from sleep, but here the world narrowed to the feel of wet earth and the rhythmic thud of feet on the floor. Shadows danced across the walls with each flicker of the oil lamps, casting elongated forms that twisted and turned with his movements. Unaware of the impending cataclysm, he continued his craft, each rotation a quiet defiance against the encroaching darkness. The soft murmur of the marketplace faded as a woman stepped into her home. The air inside was thick with the scent of dried herbs and smoke from last night's fire. An oil lamp cast an amber glow over the earthen floor, highlighting the worn texture of the clay tiles beneath her sandals. Outside, Vesuvius rumbled like distant thunder, but here she moved with quiet purpose, arranging food on a wooden table. Unaware of the impending doom, each motion was a familiar dance against the encroaching night. The flicker of an oil lamp danced across the walls of a small room, casting shadows that played on the rough stone. A young woman sat at a loom, her fingers deftly weaving strands of wool into intricate patterns. Outside, Vesuvius rumbled like distant thunder, but here the only sound was the rhythmic clatter of the loom and the occasional murmur as she worked. The air smelled of wool and smoke from last night's fire, a familiar scent that offered comfort in the encroaching darkness. The night air was thick with the scent of roasting meat as a young boy carried a tray laden with dishes through his family's courtyard. Vesuvius rumbled distantly, but here, under the flickering light of torches, life continued its quiet hum. His bare feet made no sound on the cool stone tiles, and he moved with practiced ease between tables set for dinner. The shadows cast by the flames danced across the faces of his family, their laughter soft and unaware. The rhythmic splash of water filled the small, dimly lit room. A young man scrubbed his skin raw under a stone basin, unaware of the ominous rumbling outside. Oil lamps flickered weakly, casting shadows that danced along the rough-hewn walls. Each drop echoed like a heartbeat against the stone, while Vesuvius growled in the distance. The air was thick with steam and the faint scent of olive oil soap. His movements were brisk and mechanical, a routine he knew by heart, but tonight they felt hollow, a silent echo against the encroaching night. The scent of fresh bread lingered in the air as a baker stoked the embers in his oven. Vesuvius rumbled ominously, but here the focus was on the kneading and shaping of dough. Oil lamps flickered weakly, casting shadows that swayed against the brick walls. Each movement of the baker's hands was precise, guided by years of experience. The rhythmic scraping of wooden spoons against clay bowls filled the room, a familiar melody in the encroaching night. The flicker of an oil lamp illuminated the narrow alley between two shops. A young boy leaned against a stone wall, his breath visible in the cool night air. Vesuvius rumbled like distant thunder, but here the only sound was the occasional clatter of pottery from within one of the buildings. The air smelled of smoke and damp earth, mingling with the faint scent of spices spilling out from an open door nearby. Shadows danced across his face as he gazed at the darkening sky, unaware of the impending catastrophe. The rhythmic scrape of a broom echoed through the narrow streets as an old woman swept her doorway. Vesuvius rumbled in the distance, but here the focus was on clearing away dust and debris from the day's market activity. The oil lamp at her side flickered weakly, casting long shadows that danced across the rough stone pavement. Each sweep of the broom stirred up a faint cloud of dust, mingling with the pungent smell of damp earth and smoke. She paused occasionally to wipe sweat from her brow, unaware of the impending doom. The soft thud of sandals echoed in the narrow corridor as a young girl made her way to bed. Vesuvius's distant rumble was barely perceptible, overshadowed by the faint sound of oil lamps flickering in the hallway. Each step stirred up a whisper of dust, mingling with the musty scent of old stone and damp earth. The walls were cool to the touch, and shadows danced along their rough surfaces as she passed. She paused at her door, glancing back at the flickering light before stepping into her room. The sound of a lute drifted from an open window, mingling with the distant rumble of Vesuvius. In the room, shadows danced across the walls as oil lamps flickered weakly in the cool night air. A young couple sat on a woven mat, their fingers entwined, lost in each other's gaze. The air smelled faintly of incense and rose oil. Outside, the sky darkened ominously, but inside all was warmth and quiet intimacy, unaware of the impending cataclysm. The scent of roasting meat filled the courtyard as a cook turned skewers over an open flame. Vesuvius growled in the distance, but here the focus was on the sizzle and crackle of cooking. Oil lamps cast flickering light across stone faces, their expressions lost to shadow. Children played nearby, their laughter mingling with the rhythmic clinking of pots and pans. The cook's hands moved deftly, guided by years of practice, unaware that this would be his last meal prepared in Pompeii. The rhythmic splash of water filled the night as a woman bathed in an alabaster tub. Outside, Vesuvius grumbled faintly, but here the only noise was the steady drip from the ceiling and the soft rustle of fabric being set aside. Oil lamps cast wavering shadows on the tiled walls, their light reflecting off the water's surface. The air smelled of lavender and wet stone, and the woman's skin glistened with droplets as she leaned back, lost in the warmth, unaware of the impending disaster. The soft murmur of conversation drifted from the tavern's open door, a warm glow spilling out into the narrow street. Inside, patrons leaned over low tables, their faces shadowed by flickering oil lamps. A serving girl moved between them, her steps quiet on the stone floor, unaware that this would be her last night in Pompeii. The air smelled of ale and spices, the distant rumble of Vesuvius lost to laughter and chatter. The night air carried the faint scent of jasmine as a young blacksmith hammered at his anvil. Vesuvius's distant rumble was barely noticeable, drowned out by the rhythmic clang of metal on metal. Sparks flew into the cool evening, casting brief flashes across his sweat-streaked face and the rough-hewn walls of his workshop. Oil lamps flickered weakly, their light reflecting off tools and half-finished weapons. The blacksmith's hands moved with practiced ease, unaware that this would be his final night in Pompeii. The scent of fresh bread wafted from the oven as a baker carefully slid out a loaf, its crust golden and crackling. Outside, Vesuvius rumbled faintly, but here the focus was on the soft glow of oil lamps casting warm light across rough-hewn shelves filled with goods yet to be sold. The air smelled of yeast and flour, mixed with the distant hint of smoke. The baker's hands moved with practiced ease, unaware that this would be his final night in Pompeii. In the warm embrace of a simple room, a family gathered around an oil lamp's flickering light. Soft whispers and gentle laughter filled the space as they shared stories and sipped wine. The air was thick with the scent of smoke from a nearby fire pit, its glow casting dancing shadows on whitewashed walls. Unaware of the earth's rumbling threat, their eyes met in tender moments of connection, each unaware that these would be their final hours together. The rhythmic clatter of loom shuttles filled the weaver's shop, a steady drone that masked Vesuvius's distant rumble. Oil lamps cast flickering shadows across the room, highlighting the intricate patterns forming on the looms. The air was thick with the scent of wool and linen, mingled with the faint, acrid tang of smoke. A young girl wound thread around her fingers, her movements swift and practiced, unaware that this would be her final night in Pompeii. The night's cool air drifted through open windows, carrying the distant rumble of Vesuvius. In a modest home, a woman knelt before an altar, her fingers tracing the smooth surface of a small statue. Oil lamps flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the room's stone floor and whitewashed walls. The scent of incense filled the air as she whispered prayers to unseen gods, unaware that this would be her final night in Pompeii. The night's stillness was punctuated by the distant rumble of Vesuvius, a sound almost indistinguishable from the usual seismic hum. In an open courtyard, flickering oil lamps cast long shadows over stone benches and a shallow pool reflecting the starlit sky. A young woman sat quietly, her fingers tracing patterns in the cool water. The scent of jasmine mingled with the faint acrid smell of smoke on the breeze. She was unaware that this tranquil moment would be her last under Pompeii's stars. In the heart of a bustling market, oil lamps flickered weakly over rows of stalls. The air was thick with the scent of spices and roasting meat, mingling with the distant acrid tang of smoke. A merchant, his voice rising above the din, offered deals on fine fabrics to a small crowd. Vesuvius rumbled faintly, but here, in the midst of commerce and life, no one paused to listen. The night shadows deepened, unnoticed. The rhythmic sound of water splashing against stone filled the air in a small bathhouse. Oil lamps flickered weakly, casting long shadows over smooth marble surfaces and steamy alcoves. A young woman submerged herself in the warm waters, her eyes closed, unaware that Vesuvius was rumbling softly in the distance. The scent of lavender and damp earth mingled with the acrid tang of smoke that drifted through open vents. Her skin glowed briefly each time she surfaced, a fleeting moment of peace before plunging back into the water. The sound of a lyre drifted through the open windows, mingling with the distant rumble of Vesuvius. In a modest home, a young man strummed softly, his fingers moving over the strings in practiced motion. Oil lamps cast flickering shadows across the walls, highlighting the rough texture of the plaster and the intricate patterns of the mosaic floor. The scent of pine and smoke filled the air, a subtle reminder of the approaching disaster. He was unaware that this would be his final night playing music under Pompeii's roof. The scent of freshly baked bread wafted from the small bakery, mingling with the distant rumble of Vesuvius. Inside, a baker kneaded dough by the light of an oil lamp, his hands moving in practiced rhythm. Shadows danced across the stone floor as he worked, unaware that this would be his final night shaping loaves beneath Pompeii's ancient walls. Outside, the night was cool and still, the stars above unchanging. The rhythmic clatter of loom shuttles filled a small workshop, the sound echoing off stone walls. By the light of an oil lamp, a weaver's hands moved deftly, threading the warp and weft. Shadows danced across rough-hewn stones as she worked, unaware that Vesuvius rumbled softly in the distance. The air was thick with the scent of wool and smoke, a subtle reminder of the approaching disaster. Her focus remained on the intricate patterns forming beneath her fingers, each thread a moment suspended in time. The rhythmic scrape of a knife against stone filled the air in a small kitchen. By flickering oil lamps, an elderly woman prepared vegetables with practiced care, her hands moving almost without thought. Shadows danced across the rough-hewn stones as she worked, unaware that Vesuvius rumbled softly in the distance. The air was thick with the scent of fresh herbs and smoke, a subtle reminder of the approaching disaster. Her focus remained on the task at hand, each slice a moment suspended in time. In a quiet courtyard, the sound of water trickling from a stone fountain filled the night air. A woman sat on a low marble bench, her hands folded in her lap as she gazed up at the stars. The flickering light of an oil lamp cast long shadows across the cool, smooth stones beneath her feet. Unaware of Vesuvius's distant rumble, she breathed deeply of the fragrant night air, unaware that this would be her final moment under Pompeii's starlit sky. The scent of roasting meat filled the small tavern as a cook turned skewers over an open flame. Shadows flickered across rough-hewn stones, and the distant rumble of Vesuvius was lost in the clink of cups and the murmur of conversation. Customers leaned close to the fire, their faces cast in deep relief by the dancing flames. The air was thick with smoke and the rich aroma of food, a subtle reminder of the approaching disaster that none could yet sense. The soft creak of wooden shutters opened to the night, revealing a moonlit garden. A young woman stood at the threshold, her hair spilling over bare shoulders as she breathed in the cool air. Below, the sounds of a distant party drifted up, laughter and music, a moment suspended in time. Unaware of Vesuvius's quiet rumble, she lingered, each breath a